lockdowns, travel restrictions, resource cutbacks, job loss, and other issues have also further uh, compounded the problem. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, as countries have closed their borders due to pandemic, some victims are unable to return home. Others face delays in legal proceedings, as well as reduction in their support and protection they rely on most to survive. Some are also in danger of further abuse or neglect by their captors. Human trafficking is the result of the failure of our societies and economies to protect the most vulnerable, said Elias Chatsis, chief of UNODC section that works to combat human trafficking. They should not be additionally punished during the times of crisis. And we have expert on this subject. So today, I welcome once again Dr. Astin, who is an authority on the topic. He shall be enlightening audience with his in-depth understanding and wide experience on working of human rights laws on human trafficking. With these words, once again, I, on my own behalf and on behalf of the management, faculty, non-teaching staff, participants, and dear students, extend a very warm welcome to the distinguished speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Mr. Tiwari, for the generous introduction, and thank you very much, Professor Kshetra. It's an honor to be a part of this this session today, and thank you very much to the School of Law, Sharda University, for having invited me for this. Let me begin by a very, very important quotation. Yes, it is important to expose slavery in any country, because to expose it is to kill it. Slavery is one of those monsters on darkness to whom the light of truth is death. Now, this quotation comes from somebody called as Frederick Douglass, who was born a slave, and later on he was twice nominated to become the Vice President of the United States of America. So you can see how entrenched slavery has been already in our system. Why are we talking about why are we talking about human trafficking so much today? Suddenly we've seen that over this 20th century and the 21st century, everybody seems to be talking about human trafficking, and there's certainly something which really makes it very different from the other kinds of crimes that keep happening around the world. And we're going to look at human trafficking, modern slavery in particular in today's session, and we'll also try and see what is the impact COVID-19 is having basically on this huge menace. So the reason for this is obviously the nature of the crime, the magnitude of the crime, the speed with which this crime has been spreading all around. So let me take you through a few, a few highlights about human trafficking, and then probably we can at the definition part of it, and then move on to looking at what impact COVID-19 has had on especially the victims. They're the ones who need to be, they're the ones who are affected the most. So look at these highlights. Do you know that the world's fastest growing crime after arms trafficking, after drug trafficking is human trafficking? We are third on the list of, the kind of the magnitude of the crime that is taking place. And as the professor earlier pointed out, about 50 million people are trafficked as we speak today. Now, 50 million is a big number. 50 million is almost double the population of Australia. And that's a big number that we're talking about. It's not just a number, it's human beings at the end of the day. The majority of the victims are, of course, women and children. But there is a myth that men are not trafficked. Men are also trafficked. But yes, women and children are trafficked more because they are vulnerable. They are weak. That's what is at least thought of. Now, there are about, there's another myth that is that only women are traffickers, but no, even men can be traffickers and even women can be traffickers, because sometimes children are easily swayed away by a woman rather than a man, and that's why you'd see that traffickers could be women and men. Prosecution rates are, of course, alarmingly low. And why would I say that? I would say that because of the clandestine nature of this crime. So everybody, this is an organized crime. It happens mostly underground, and that's the reason why whatever data that we are pointing out, I'm talking about this 50 million figure and all the other figures that I'm talking about. These are all figures that are there, but you can't heavily rely upon them. By the way, I've got these figures from the Global Slavery Index. That's where we're getting our figures from. Now, another thing is this act that is carried out. It's a very, very lucrative business for those who are into it, generating something like an annual profit of $150 billion. Now, $150 billion is double the GDP of Nepal and Estonia, these countries put together. So we're talking about huge profits there. And obviously, that's one of the reasons why, you know, people are so much swayed into it, and it's become a hub of crime. Now, trafficking does not only happen internally within borders, it also happens externally. It has this cross-border aspect to it. If you look at the statistics around the figures, they say generally that there's a more percentage of women who are trafficked. That's a fact that is seen in most of our numbers, but men are about 18%, boys and girls are about 12 and 21% respectively. So those are the victims that we're talking about, the profile of our victims. So it's men, women, and children. And basically they come from countries which are generally the developing ones. We're talking about countries like Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. We're talking about Western and Central Africa, most of them coming from China, Thailand, Vietnam. And if you look at Asia, of course, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. In fact, I mean, you know, Russia, Ukraine, and Moldova also seem to be on the list, topping the list of all these numbers. Did you know, in this report that was generated last year, it said that about 1.9 million Indonesian citizens are abroad today on expired visas. Have you thought of this? 1.9 million Indonesians. These are citizens of Indonesia and they are abroad on expired visas. So what are they doing abroad? How vulnerable are they? And how easily they could be swayed into, you know, such kind of crimes? They could be easily trafficked. Most of the trafficking that really takes place, and human trafficking that we're talking about, happens for two instances. One is, of course, for sex trafficking, and the other one is the labor trafficking, the bonded labor that we're talking about. But of course, it is necessary to understand that both happen on a great scale. It's something where both are made to suffer, both sexes. Particularly if you're talking about women and you're talking about sex slaves that we are looking at, women being forced into prostitution, forced into sexual slavery, maybe pole dances, lap dances, cabarets, and all these that we keep hearing from time to time. And of course, men are used as bonded labor in the agriculture industry or in the mining industry or in the palm oil industry. So that's basically the profile of our victims. Let's look at the profile of the perpetrators, the profile of our traffickers. Now, mainly, trafficking is an organized crime. Human trafficking is an organized crime, which means it doesn't mean it cannot happen in silos. So we do have traffickers who are individuals, but generally it is done in organized groups. So for example, the Yakuza in Japan or the snakehead in China or the Albanian mafia in Europe, they are the ones that we're looking at who are probably, you know, the control centers of this crime. Now, 55% men and 45% women are traffickers. So there's a big number of women there. We can see that. And the trend of having women is obviously because children tend to trust women. So it's easy to traffic children through women. Now, 54% of the traffickers are unknown to victims, whereas 46% know the victims very well. So you can understand how difficult it is for these victims because they're lured into this so easily thanks to this undue influence that probably is used on them. Now, have you ever asked yourself why there are so many foreign women working as prostitutes in your countries? Or have you ever asked why there are women working, I mean, in foreign countries as prostitutes? That's probably, it's probably because there are men who are willing to pay for their sexual services. And, have you ever asked yourself why people are exploited in the mining industry, in the palm oil industry, or in the garment industry, or the agriculture industry, even the construction industry? This is obviously because employers benefit from cheap labor. And that's because we as customers need cheap products. So somewhere we are also responsible. And talking about the various causes that could, lead to trafficking, obviously we're talking about poverty, unemployment, discrimination, humanitarian crisis, and political instability, of course. And this really brings, more towards our topic, and see how COVID-19 is affecting the menace. It's not really helped in any way. It's probably worse. Poverty, unemployment, discrimination, humanitarian crisis. Obviously, these are the ones that have led to economic hardship. These have led to economic issues that people have faced. This kind of pandemic, and undoubtedly, one may believe that the movement and the closing of borders and increased police presence and controlling streets seems to have led to a reduction of certain types of crimes. Yes, but we're talking about an organized crime. You have to look at it very differently. Now, as law students and practitioners and as law academics, you will agree to it that for any act to punish, it has to be criminalized. And we have a lack of criminalism. And that's why it was also very important that we had a definition for human trafficking. And even, sorry, can I see your
Aiba Bala, there is somebody with the name of Aiba Bala who should mute himself. Please remove Aiba Bala. And Himangi Shah is still presenting your screen. Rishu, please remove this Aiba Bala. Lot of noise coming from his device. Yeah, now better. Sorry for interruption.
Not a problem.
This is Philip's side of technology.
I understand. I totally understand. Not a problem. So, as I said earlier, it is very important to, for any act to be punished, it is very important that we must have a definition of that act. And that's why it should first be criminalized. So until and unless an act has not been criminalized, you can't punish people who commit that act. Now, the worst part of it was, until the year 2000, human trafficking did not have any definition. We didn't know what is the definition of human trafficking. The world didn't know anything about it. And that's why, people who were under the garb of human smuggling were treated as victims of human trafficking and vice versa. That really made things very difficult. But somewhere in the year 2000, we had a protocol. It's called the PAMELRO Protocol, and this protocol is obviously supplementary to the United Nations Convention on Transnational Organized Crime 2000. Now, the protocol has been signed by 173 state parties, and this protocol really gave us a definition of trafficking in Article 3 of this protocol, basically. And it's called the PAMELRO Protocol because Palermo is a place in Italy, and that's where this was really, all pieces were put together. Now, this definition is a very, very important definition. As somebody from India, you would, see how India has signed this convention. I believe it signed the convention in the year, I can quickly look up and tell you, yes. So India has signed the convention in 2011, ratified it in 2011, and under Criminal Law Amendment Act, we have brought in changes in the respective codes of various countries who have signed and ratified this protocol. So with regard to India, India has brought in a change in section 370 and 370A of the Indian Penal Code of 1860. So we'll talk about it in some time. If you look at the definition can actually be cracked into three parts. One is the act, one is the means, and then the third part is the purpose. Now, the means, act, and the purpose, all three are very important for us to establish that trafficking is actually taking place. But as far as a child being trafficked is concerned and the various age of children is, of course, the age prescribed by the UN. So we're saying that as far as that is concerned, the means is not an important element of the definition when we're talking about children being trafficked, because children are expected to not be able to give their consent. They're supposed to be parties which are not competent to contract or not competent to give their consent. So we would look at act and purpose only in those cases, but for all other cases, the act, means and purpose has been described. And I'll quickly read the definition, because this is the same definition that comes again in the Indian Penal Code 370, 370A. So he says trafficking in persons means the recruitment, transportation, harboring or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, of fraud, of deception, of abuse of power or position of vulnerability, or giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of other person having control over other person for the purpose of exploitation. So the definition sounds a little big, but it is a very, the scope of the definition is pretty vast. It covers a lot of aspects, and you'd see that, I mean, as India has ratified and brought in changes under the Criminal Law Amendment Act. Similarly, even Australia in Division 270 and 271 has picked up this definition and adopted it, and after ratifying the convention. And that's really very important, because what really happens is there's a concept of human smuggling and there's a concept of human trafficking. Now, the difference between the two is human smuggling is a violation of the immigration law, because somebody is moving into another country unlawfully. But over here, in human trafficking, we're actually seeing that there's a person who's being brought into another country, but he's being brought in because he's under delusion. He's not being told where he's going and what's really happening. So he's legally moving into another country, but then he's being actually forced into forced labor or sexual exploitation, so on and so forth. If you look at very quickly the international sphere, it is not that we don't have international protocols and we didn't have any international conventions on this matter. We've always had it, but we didn't have a clear definition. And that's where the problem occurred. So if you look at the 1971 Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, well, there are 189 state parties to that convention. Or the Convention on the Rights of Child, again, 196 state parties there, or the optional protocol on the rights of child and safe children, child prostitutes, and child pornography in the year 2000. So there's a lot of legislation internationally around that area. Even if you have a look at, let's say, the regional legislations that are there in place, you have the Council of Europe Convention, the Charter for Fundamental Rights of European Union. This is signed by about 47 European Union states. Let's talk about Asia. You've got the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation Convention on the prevention and combating trafficking of women and children for prostitution. That's there since 2002. But then again, because there's not been a definition, that's where we've been, I mean, it's been very hard to try traffickers. Firstly, of course, because it's an organized sector. Secondly, the clandestine nature of the crimes. It's not pretty easy at all. And as I said earlier, restrictions are there on COVID-19. The borders are closed. So things may seem to general public that, look, things are in control. And at least now it must have, come down. But that's not the fact, because look at us. We were all the educational institutions around the world. We were into on-campus teaching. But because of COVID-19, we all have moved from on-campus teaching to online. So see what has happened. We changed our strategy. We changed our model. We found out a new way of working around the system. And so have traffickers. They've not stayed idle. Because it's $150 billion lucrative business. They wouldn't just sit idle till the pandemic goes off. No. I think there was this movie Slumdog Millionaire where Danny Boyle has very clearly showed us how children were blinded. And in many countries, we know that children are used as child soldiers. I think those are also one of the few aspects that are looked into as far as trafficking is concerned. Well, I've not yet spoken about organ trade, but that is, again, a very, very big hub. Now, if you look at trafficking, you have got generally three types of countries that we talk about. There's a country of origin, there is a country of transit, and there is a country of destination. So basically, the victims are picked up from the country of origin, probably taken to the country of transit, and then finally they are sold off in the country of destination, wherever that would be. And tackling this kind of crime requires everybody to come together and work together towards it. Why do I say that? There's a reason for it. Look, if you look at the legal aspect, the jurisprudence around international law that has been built up, we might say that there are three ways in which human trafficking can be controlled. And the first answer that we get is, and we go to, is the international criminal law. So can international criminal law put an embargo on human trafficking? Let's analyze it in 1 or 2 minutes and see if it can do it. Now, what does international criminal law do? It basically aims to prosecute and punish crimes before an international court or an international tribunal. And you are aware of it, that we've had tons of international tribunals, and there is one independent international court sitting in The Hague. So as far as your international tribunals are concerned, you've seen the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. You have seen the Delhi District Courts, the Cambodian Tribunal, the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. You've seen so many of them. The Darfur, the one that is trying the Darfur crimes, and you've got an international court sitting in The Hague. It's called the International Criminal Court, established in 2002. And to be very honest, let us see if international criminal law can try such cases. Now, if you have a look at Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, it talks about something called as crimes against humanity. And crimes against humanity is further defined in Article 7, and you will see that sexual slavery and enslavement, these two are a part of Article 7, which means International Criminal Court can actually intervene by putting Article 7 of the Rome Statute in motion and trying all these perpetrators for this crime. This is all theoretical. Can it really be done in practice? The answer is probably far from a yes. And the reason is, of course, there are so many reasons. India, America, Israel, and so many other countries are not a part or not a state party to the International Criminal Court. Look, the International Criminal Court is not the highest judicial organ of the United Nations. The highest judicial organ is, of course, the ICJ, International Court of Justice. So how does ICC work, International Criminal Court? Basically, it has been working on getting funds from state parties. Well, that is not a very good thing to do. If you have a look at all the cases that ICC has tried or is trying since 2002, majority of focus has been on Africa. What happened about the other parts of the world where you have genocide, you've had war crimes, you've had crimes against humanity, and you've had crimes of aggression? So that's why I'm saying that it's probably not the best way to tackle the human trafficking issue. Also, another thing is, as you would know, International Criminal Court has complementary jurisdiction, and that is what it means is it can try cases only if a state party is unwilling to or unable to try a matter domestically, which means again it's a big limitation for ICC to succeed, and that's why probably international criminal law may not have an answer to our challenge that we are facing at the moment. So let's look at an answer somewhere else and look at this. We have something called as transnational criminal law. So let us see if we have transnational criminal law who would come at aid and help us in solving these disputes, these crimes, putting victims in place, fixing our perpetrators. Now, generally, crimes are not only of international nature, but their nature is also sometimes cross-border. And that is what we see sometimes in cybercrime, particularly drug crime generally is one nature of a transnational crime that we come across. How effective and how good is how good can we have as transnational criminal law being addressing our issue of human trafficking? Well, again, there is a weakness of transnational criminal law, and that is every nation is very, very sensitive about their sovereignty, and sovereignty is a major part for many of them. So far we have not come to the stage where data, your forensics, or some kind of reports are being shared by countries. That has not really happened. Every state wants to maintain its own sovereignty, and that's one of the reasons, biggest hindrance that is actually pulling back transnational criminal law to come into force and really do well. But I think for somewhere transnational criminal law should be the answer. Now, the third branch of law is, of course, the human rights law, and the human rights doesn't look at human trafficking just as a crime, but it looks as a violation of human rights. And probably human rights law has an answer. And through our convention that we have put in place, the European Convention, of course, and of course the COE Convention that we spoke about, and our PAMELO protocol, that probably may have an answer. And the reason why I'm saying that may have an answer is because it just doesn't look at the prosecutrix, it also looks at the victims, it looks at the perpetrator. So basically, if you look at a triangle, an imaginary triangle, and you might put prosecute on one end, protect on one end, and prevent on the other end, that would be the obligation under international law towards tackling this crime. We call it the 3P approach. You prosecute, you protect, and you prevent the crime from taking place. And of course, with this 3P approach is also something called as the 3R approach, which talks about rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate. Everybody talks about what happens to the perpetrators of the crime and how they are punished, but nobody ever thinks about the victims. Now, this protocol, and of course the European Union protocol, the convention, that is something that has gone ahead and looked at the identification of the victims, providing them with some kind of a psychological support, permitting them to stay within the borders, and of course compensation. That is something that could probably put them at ease, at least, if not anything else. Now, we've been talking about COVID-19, and look, we all know for a fact that everything has changed ever since this outbreak has taken place, minute to minute. Everything has changed across the world. We're working differently today. And the amount of strain that has been put on lives of people, it's been tremendous. Now, we've had these unprecedented measures from the governments of various countries to flatten the curve. And we've had quarantines, we've got lockdowns, curfews, travel restrictions, and limitations on economic activities, and of course, public life. So if you look at it in the first instance, probably you might think that, wow, this is really good that has happened because of so much of police protection on borders and on our streets. This crime could have probably been dissuaded and has been put to an end. Now, you have to understand that, as I said earlier, $150 billion business. The whole world has changed its business model, and unfortunately, traffickers have also moved to a new model that has been created thanks to this pandemic, and they continue to abuse modern technologies and they thrive. The crime this has been thriving ever since. Let me quickly sum up some impacts that trafficking has brought on, that COVID-19 has brought on human trafficking. Look, identification of human trafficking victims is, as it is, very difficult. Why do I say that? I say it because of the clandestine nature of the crime. Now, obviously, because of COVID-19, it has become even more difficult to identify these victims. So you can just imagine what must be happening to them. Also, that they are more exposed to contracting this virus. They are less equipped to prevent it and have less access of healthcare and to ensure any kind of recovery. Now, it is essential and practical to support them, but how do they do it? Because the entire world, it has a different priority today. Earlier, the priorities were very different, and now everybody is involved in their own countries trying to see how they can come out of this pandemic. So who would be really, much caring for them? Now, the pandemic has also brought in a dramatic increase of unemployment. Reduction in income means that the significant members of people who are already vulnerable, and they're going to find themselves further into precarious circumstances. What about children? Look, educational institutions are not just there to impart education. There are a lot of educational institutions in the world which also provide shelter and nourishment to the children. Now, they do not have schools for so many days. So again, they are the ones that are found in that vulnerable lot. Think about the undocumented migrants and seasonal workers that are, they find themselves in this precarious situation. They're waiting there for their visas to be extended, but now the home offices in various countries have also closed because their priorities are different. If you look at the justice system, the adjudication of cases include those on compensation, And probably this has also been halted and justice has been delayed for these victims. So filing deadlines in courts may be missed. Evidence collection may not be possible because you understand the manner in which this crime takes place. You need to be there. I mean, evidence needs to be gathered at the earliest, and that's all stopped because the borders have closed. I mean, service providers have literally stopped. So, you know, in a toto, I would, I mean, I thought this might be of interest to you. So if you look at the Indian perspective, in India, there are only 3 important legislation that you might want to, apart from the constitution, that you might want to rely upon to see whether trafficking in human beings can be curbed. Now, the first one is, of course, as I said, Section 370 and 370A of the Indian Penal Code. But then you have to understand that the legislation is about 160 years old, and they have brought in an amendment through the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013 after they ratified that convention that we spoke about. So that is one convention. And just for your information, the punishment there is about 7 to 10 years if this person was caught in trafficking. But with regard to another legislation that is in place, of course, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, and we generally call it, you would call it PITA, P-I-T-A. But then again, you have to understand that Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act is not for human trafficking. It is more focused on prostitutes. And that's why I wouldn't count it as a very, very robust legislation. There was an anti-trafficking bill that was brought into the parliament in 2018. By Mrs. Menaka Gandhi. She was the then Minister for Women and Child Development. And that legislation was, I thought, and I was following up with it very well. And I thought that is the legislation that could bring up a lot of, you know, robustness to the entire system, because that did bring up the stringent punishment from anything to just directly, it said 10 years or more. And but I think because of some kind of politics, they had to refer this matter to the standing committee. That was the view of the opposition, and unfortunately the bill has stayed there. It has not moved ahead, and it has not seen the light of the day. But that is one legislation that we might be able to you know, bring into see the light of the day, and probably that might be the answer. Very quickly, if I can tell you, if you look at international criminal law, and I gave a briefing about it, I thought probably the way forward may be Article 7 of the Rome Statute, putting that into motion. That might help us to curb this crime. We also need to think towards how the trafficking victims can be treated, because look, these are unprecedented situations. World has not witnessed something like this before. And I understand that our priorities have changed, but if we want to protect the victims and see that least damage is done to them, I think the whole world community will have to come together, because COVID-19 has affected everybody, each one of us. We're talking about quarantine, we're talking about social distancing. Even in classrooms and in meetings, when you have meetings, we're saying that we should maintain a distance of 1.5 to 2 meters. Do you think the victims of trafficking have the luxury of this 1.5 or 2 meter social distancing norm? No. I mean, WHO has made this norm and we all are following it, and that's great. But that's not what is ultimately going to happen to them. They are forced to live into rooms like matchboxes, and the conditions that they live in and they work in are abysmal. And that's the reason why I think it's very important that we start prioritizing them. Probably law, when we talk about the legal services, compensation claims of victims, migrants, needs to be managed very well. And I can see that, of course, this is something that is going to take time, because, you know, it's affected the entire world. It's affecting countries. Now, there are countries which are getting out of this pandemic, but there are still countries which are sucked into it, and it's going to take time for them to come out. But at the same time, a balance needs to be struck, because unless that is done, we're not going to be doing anything fair with these victims. We're going to move them into more and more kind of difficulties, and unfortunately, it's a very dark end for them. That's what I feel. Well, I think I have spoken enough, and I did want to keep the last 15-20 minutes for any kind of questions that you may have. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your wonderful session. So I would like to Good. Yes, Gagan Malhotra is asking that does any other law will be implied on the physical violence of the victim across the state?
So physical violence of the victim across the state. So you're talking about India, to be specific, and you're talking about victims of human trafficking. Am I correct? So if that is the case, then yes, there are laws in place, and of course, it's not just victims of human trafficking. If there is physical violence across within the internal borders, it is a matter of internal protection that the state government provides to people, its residents and the citizens, of course. So yeah, there are laws in place, and they would be tackling such issues. It really doesn't need to be specifically for victims of trafficking.
Okay, sir. One more following question from him.
Yeah.
That if the accused dies in the process of trafficking across border, would the case be dealt by the ICJ, International Court of Justice?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Now, the International Court of Justice is the highest judicial organ of the UN, as I said earlier. But look, it has a very limited scope. The scope of ICJ is to solve disputes between states. So if you actually see, this should actually lead to a dispute, and unfortunately, one person dying across a state may probably not become such an important matter to the state to take it as a dispute. But if it does take it, it can be, because it would. But if you have a look at what ICJ looks at, ICJ has been looking at basically issues regarding borders with countries. There's a dispute between the flow of some river, or of course, as we've seen earlier, this naval officer that has been arrested in Pakistan, Kulbhushan Jadhav. So yes, those cases are there. Yes. But that's what I'm saying. It has to have. I mean, unfortunately, this requires a lot of lobbying for a matter to go to ICJ. So unless and until everybody feels the importance of this and realizes this, it hardly wouldn't. It wouldn't hardly go there.
Yes, sir. One more question from Poon Godi. And is there any specific norms for paying?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Is there any specific law
for paying the compensation for the victim?
Yes. Actually, I didn't. I thought I could avoid that because it was but you must you must go back and do Russia.
Okay, sir.
So it's called Rantsev versus Cyprus and Russia, where there was this 20-year-old girl who went from Russia to Cyprus, and she was actually trafficked and treated very badly. And Europe and her father took this case, and she died at the end. And her father took the case to the European Court of Human Rights, and the court has given a systematic manner in which compensation could be done in such cases.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Sir, I have one question.
Please, sir.
Sir, please ask.
Whether in such cases criminal courts come in picture.
मम्मी दादाजी बोल रहे हैं
Whether
दादाजी बोल रहे हैं दादाजी
human trafficking,
oh my god,
criminal court has any jurisdiction, or can we deal with the international criminal justice only, International Court of Justice?
No, International Criminal Court has jurisdiction under Article 7, but to try any case, International Criminal Court, a country has to be state party to that court. So it's like the court, it's like the country should have a membership with that court. So until that membership is not there, International Criminal Court is not going to go into somebody else's country and try something on its own suo motu. They are not allowed to do it because of sovereignty.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, one more question from Kokila Saxena, that in spite of various national and international laws for trafficking, we are unable to recognize people involved and also unable to protect people. Then what is the way forward? She is asking for that.
Right. So the way forward, I think, is we all have to firstly understand that trafficking is an issue. Because at the moment, what has happened is people have not really realized that human trafficking is such a big issue, whereas it is a big problem. So firstly, we need to understand that this is a problem. We have to realize it. We have to accept it. And once we have accepted it, we all need to work together closely to make sure that this is curbed, which means countries have to work together, because this is a transnational organized crime. There's a country of transit, destination, and of course, origin. And that is actually telling you about the cross-border way in which it works. And it's very important that we all work together. So let me tell you in this manner. Our investigation agencies need to work together. That is the correct answer to this. So, you know, we need to share records. We need to share our databases. We need to share all that secret information that we collect from these investigation agencies across the world. They should all come together and work together. Only then would this happen. Because let's say there's an organized group in India which is selling women to another country, let's say in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan government needs to know so much more about this organized group in India. How would they know that? They don't have the sovereignty of India. So obviously, intelligence has to be shared. And that is one way in which things will move forward. We need to be alert. So what can we do? If you see cheap goods and you buy them, I think somewhere you need to go back and think that this is so cheap. Why is it so cheap? Is there something else that has gone into it to make it so cheap? And probably you might realize that, I mean, you know, some of the things, like, for example, the food that we eat, the manner in which the palm oil is extracted in Indonesia, you know, little children are doing it. As I'm talking to you today, in Democratic Republic of Congo, 40,000 children are working in the mines and they're extracting minerals from there. So I think it's very important that we all realize we need to do boycott of stuff. For example, public boycott sometimes becomes very useful. And those are the ways in which we as citizens of the world can, you know, try and curb these kinds of issues. I don't know if I've been able to answer.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for answering this question. One more question is from Alok Sharma. That is, how will COVID-19 impact efforts to end modern slavery and forced labor?
Good. Now, you have spoken about something which has nothing to do with human trafficking, to be honest. You have touched the point of modern slavery. Now, very quickly, if I can tell you, modern slavery is very different from human trafficking. There are various laws only on modern slavery across the world. So, for example, Australia in 2018 came up with its Modern Slavery Act. So Modern Slavery Act is basically focusing on any kind of forced labor, any kind of bonded labor, or any kind of violation of human rights that is done across the supply chains of various businesses. So let's say I have a garment shop in Australia, but the clothes that are stitched somewhere in Bangladesh. So the modern slavery law basically now has brought in a provision where we all, as companies, would have to inform the government about whether there is any modern slavery in any of the supply chains. Now, your question was, of course, how does this impact COVID-19? So yes, it has made countries more aware, because I believe there are about 14 or 16 countries in the world that have the modern slavery legislations, the Modern Slavery Acts. And please don't take Modern Slavery Act to be something to do with human trafficking. There are two different things. Modern Slavery Act has something to do with, we're talking about bonded labor, we're talking about people who are made to work in inhuman conditions. And, for example, let me give you an example. In India, in Tamil Nadu, there was a scheme called Sumangali scheme, if you have heard of it. Now, the Sumangali scheme has been banned, but under the Sumangali scheme, what would really happen is these companies would approach the parents of the girl child, and the girl child between 14 to 16 years would be forced to work for 3 to 5 years in the company, and she would probably have to do stitching of garments, and then she would be paid for these 5 years work. She would be paid at the end of 5 years. And how would they agree to it? So the parents would be told that this money that they would be paid would be used for their dowry. And that's where, again, this Sumangali scheme really thrived, and it thrived a lot. And of course, it has been banned, but I'm told that it still happens in various pockets. So that's that, yeah.
Yes, sir. Sir, one more question. That is, that does human trafficking is proposed to the economic activity? It is asked by the Lalit Mudgal.
Does human trafficking come again?
Should I repeat, sir?
Yes, please.
Does human trafficking purports the economic activity?
Sorry, your voice is cracking. Does human trafficking? I just heard that much.
Does human trafficking is proportional to the economic activity?
Okay, I think the kind of look, this is a good question, because look, if I'm involved in arms trafficking, and let's say arms and ammunition, once a bomb has been blasted or a bullet has been shot, you can't reuse the bomb and the bullet. With regards to drugs and human trafficking, it's a little different. So a human being can be used again and again and again and again. So for example, a woman, if she is forced into sexual slavery, she could, the amount of revenue that can be generated could be, it could go leaps and bounds if you actually see. The kind of bonded laborers, people are being forced to work. So it's really the proportion that goes into it, and the amount of revenue that is generated, that is something that really is abysmal. It's shocking.
Okay, thank you, sir. You have all the many questions. You have answered your slides as well, and for this lecture, and actually you have covered all the global norms, and also you have given the sight on the how to prevent this right of the victims of the human trafficking even during the pandemic, and how we can enhance the jurisprudence of the victims' right even during the pandemic, since the all authorities and states have shifted their priorities. In that as well, how we can maintain and prevent and promote the rights of the victims of the human trafficking through the global norms to the state norms, and with the comparative study. So I am sure that this session surely is going to help us and to enhance our jurisprudence on the human trafficking and their rights. So now I would like to thank you, sir, for your this lecture, as well as I would like to thank our respected Dean, sir, for giving this opportunity, and he has also shared his wisdom. He is having also a specialized area on human rights and criminal justice system. So he spoke very well on that. So I would like to thank everyone, and on the behalf of my dear colleagues and the Sarda University. So thank you very much to all of you. And there were some technical glitches, and my support staff was not there today. He caught ill. So there was some disturbance in sound, etc. So we are sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful session. In a very...
Dean sir would like to say.
Yeah, in a very easy to understand with illustrations. Yeah, the very difficult topic was made very easy for all of us. Wonderful session.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.